Today, we're looking at a death that initially appeared medical. At 10:03 a.m., a woman with a known heart condition told her niece she wasn't feeling well and would call later. That call never came. At 12:17 p.m., her husband called 911. By the end of that same day, he was asking an immigration attorney how her death would affect his legal status. The timeline raised questions no medical explanation could answer. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Arjun Malhotra was 32 years old at the time he arrived in the United States. He was born and raised in Chandigarh, India, in a financially stable family. His father owned a mid-sized logistics business. His mother had worked as a college administrator before retiring. Arjun held a master's degree in business administration from a private university in Delhi and had spent 5 years working in supply chain management for an export firm. Among colleagues, he was described as disciplined, articulate, and careful with appearances. He dressed conservatively, spoke fluent English, and avoided conflict. His social media presence was curated. Professional photographs, neutral opinions, no visible excess. Privately, Arjun had been under increasing pressure to marry. His family had introduced him to several prospective partners through traditional arrangements, none of which progressed. Friends later recalled that he spoke often about wanting autonomy and distance from family expectations, though he continued to rely on his parents financially during career transitions. He had no criminal record and no history of documented disputes. Margaret Collins was 68 years old. She lived alone in a single-family home in a quiet suburb of Sacramento, California, where she had resided for more than 20 years. She was widowed. Her husband, a civil engineer, had died of a stroke 8 years earlier. Margaret had worked as a medical billing coordinator until retirement and received a stable pension. Her home was paid off. She had savings accounts, a modest investment portfolio, and a life insurance policy established years before. She had no dependent children. Her closest relatives were 2 adult nieces living out of state. Neighbors described Margaret as polite and reserved. She volunteered twice a week at a local library and was known for keeping detailed, handwritten calendars. She maintained regular medical appointments for hypertension and arthritis, but lived independently. Friends noted that after her husband's death, her social circle had narrowed. She used online platforms primarily for communication and reading groups before eventually joining an international dating site catering to older adults. Arjun and Margaret first exchanged messages in late January. The initial conversations were formal and structured. He asked about her daily routines, health, and interests. She asked about his education, family, and work history. Over time, the tone shifted toward personal disclosure. Arjun spoke about cultural constraints and his desire for a companion who chose him freely. Margaret spoke about loneliness, aging, and the difficulty of imagining the rest of her life alone. Their communication moved from the platform to private messaging and regular video calls. By April, Arjun proposed marriage during a video call. He framed it as a practical and emotional decision, stating that he wanted stability and partnership rather than prolonged uncertainty. Margaret informed her nieces, who expressed hesitation due to the speed of the relationship and the age difference. Margaret dismissed their concerns, stating that she felt respected and seen. In May, Arjun applied for a K-1 fiancé visa. The application included photographs of the couple during Margaret's visit to India, correspondence records, and sworn statements of intent to marry. The visa was approved without delay. In August, Arjun arrived in California. He moved into Margaret's home. Within 6 weeks, they were legally married at a county courthouse, witnessed by a friend from Margaret's library group and a local notary. To external observers, The marriage appeared orderly and consensual. There were no visible signs of conflict. Immigration paperwork for adjustment of status was filed promptly. Medical appointments continued as scheduled. Household routines appeared unchanged. This was the state of events before the marriage began to alter the balance of control inside the house. The marriage certificate was filed on September 18th. The following week, Arjun and Margaret attended a joint appointment with an immigration attorney to initiate the adjustment of status process. Forms I-485 and I-864 were prepared using Margaret as the financial sponsor. Bank statements, tax returns, and proof of residence were copied and logged. The attorney advised that the process would take several months and cautioned that any material changes in marital circumstances should be reported. Both acknowledged the instruction. Inside the home, routines began to shift. Arjun took responsibility for managing online accounts, citing familiarity with digital systems. Utility bills were transferred to electronic statements under a shared email address he created. Margaret continued paying them from her account, but the access credentials were no longer solely hers. When she asked for printed copies, Arjun suggested it was unnecessary and inefficient. Financial discussions became more frequent. Arjun proposed consolidating accounts to simplify sponsorship documentation. Margaret declined, stating she preferred to keep long-standing arrangements unchanged. She reiterated that marriage did not require financial merger. Arjun accepted the decision outwardly, but continued to raise the subject in different forms, including suggesting joint ownership of the house for estate clarity. Margaret scheduled an appointment with her estate planner in early October. She informed Arjun afterward that her will and beneficiary designations would remain unchanged for the time being. Her nieces would continue to be named beneficiaries on the life insurance policy. Arjun did not respond immediately. Later that evening, he asked detailed questions about the policy's payout structure and whether marriage altered beneficiary rights. Margaret replied that it did not unless she chose to revise it. Medical developments further altered the dynamic. In mid-October, Margaret received test results confirming progression of a cardiac condition previously considered stable. The prognosis indicated increased risk but no immediate intervention. She shared the information with Arjun and expressed concern about maintaining independence. Arjun accompanied her to subsequent appointments and began keeping copies of discharge summaries and medication lists. At the same time, communication between Arjun and his family intensified. Phone records later showed daily calls to India, often late at night. Margaret noticed that these conversations stopped abruptly when she entered the room. When asked, Arjun stated he was discussing business matters and immigration logistics. Margaret confided to a friend from the library group that she felt monitored. She noted that Arjun insisted on knowing her schedule and discouraged unscheduled visits, citing privacy during the immigration process. The friend advised caution and suggested legal consultation. Margaret did not act on the suggestion, but documented several interactions in her personal calendar. The first explicit confrontation occurred on November 6th. Margaret informed Arjun that she intended to add a clause to her will granting him a limited spousal allowance but not property ownership. Arjun responded that such limitations implied mistrust. According to Margaret's later account to her niece, Arjun stated that without shared assets, he remained temporary in her life. The discussion ended without resolution. In the following weeks, Arjun conducted multiple online searches related to divorce timelines, conditional permanent residence requirements, and spousal sponsorship obligations. Browser history recovered later showed queries saved but not bookmarked. No legal filings were made. By late November, Margaret told her niece during a phone call that she was reconsidering the marriage. She stated that if the pressure continued, she would consult an attorney about separation. This information did not remain private. Call logs indicate Arjun contacted the niece's number later that same day, though no conversation was completed. The marriage remained legally intact. Immigration processing continued, but the balance that had existed before registration no longer held. By early December, the household operated under parallel routines. Margaret continued her volunteer schedule and medical visits. Arjun managed correspondence related to immigration and increasingly positioned himself as the intermediary for administrative matters. He collected mail addressed to both of them and sorted it before placing it on the kitchen counter. Margaret did not object initially, but later noted in her calendar that certain bank notifications had been opened before she saw them. On December 9th, Margaret contacted her estate planner again. The call lasted 18 minutes. Phone records show that Arjun was not present in the house at the time. The following day, Margaret requested copies of her financial documents from the planner's office and scheduled an in-person meeting for December 18th. She did not inform Arjun of the appointment. That same week, Arjun contacted the immigration attorney independently. He asked whether marital separation during the adjustment of status period could trigger additional review. The attorney reiterated that separation or divorce before approval could result in delays or denial and advised maintaining a stable household. No further guidance was provided. Communication between Arjun and Margaret became transactional. Witnesses later described interactions as calm but constrained. Raised voices were not reported. Instead, disagreements ended abruptly, often followed by silence. Margaret resumed keeping handwritten notes, listing dates, times, and brief descriptions of discussions. The entries were factual and non-emotive. On December 14th, Margaret attended a cardiology follow-up. The physician adjusted her medication and documented increased fatigue and dizziness. Discharge instructions advised limiting stress and avoiding sudden exertion. Arjun accompanied her and signed the visitor log. Surveillance footage from the clinic showed him asking staff about after-hours emergency protocols. 2 days later, Arjun accessed Margaret's laptop while she was asleep. Digital forensics later confirmed that he reviewed saved documents related to her insurance policy and scanned copies of her will. No files were altered. Access occurred at 1:42 a.m. and lasted 11 minutes. On December 17th, Margaret spoke with her niece again. According to the niece's later statement, Margaret said she felt managed rather than partnered. She stated that she intended to consult a family law attorney after the holidays and, if necessary, ask Arjun to move out. She did not express fear, but described the situation as unsustainable. That evening, Arjun searched online for information related to spousal eviction timelines, emergency medical response times for cardiac patients, and statistical causes of death among elderly individuals with heart disease. The searches were conducted over a 40-minute period and cleared from the browser history the following day. The scheduled meeting with the estate planner on December 18th did not occur. Margaret canceled it that morning, citing fatigue. She rescheduled for December 27th. Medical records show that she reported worsening dizziness that same afternoon. On December 21st, Margaret told Arjun directly that she wanted to pause immigration filings until they resolved financial boundaries. According to Arjun's later statement, the conversation remained calm. He stated that Margaret said she needed space to think. He did not leave the house. Over the next 3 days, Margaret reduced outside contact. Her calendar entries stopped after December 23rd. No further calls to her nieces were recorded. Neighbors later reported seeing Arjun taking out trash bags late at night, but observed no unusual activity during the day. By December 24th, Margaret's cardiologist attempted a follow-up call regarding test results. The call went unanswered. A voicemail was left. It was never returned. The conditions inside the house had shifted from negotiation to impasse. Margaret had begun planning a separation. Arjun was aware that any loss of marital stability carried institutional consequences beyond the relationship itself. The sequence moved toward a point where resolution through withdrawal was no longer mutually acceptable. On December 26th at 7:18 a.m., Arjun placed a call to Margaret's cardiology clinic. He stated that his wife had experienced dizziness overnight and asked whether medication side effects could include sudden collapse. The nurse advised monitoring symptoms and calling emergency services if Margaret lost consciousness. The call was logged. At 9:42 a.m., a neighbor's exterior camera recorded Arjun exiting the house alone and retrieving a package from the front step. He returned inside within 2 minutes. No other movement was recorded for the next 4 hours. Phone metadata shows Margaret's last outgoing activity at 10:03 a.m., a brief text to her niece reading, "Not feeling well today, we'll call later." There were no further messages, calls, or calendar entries from her device after that time. According to Arjun's later statement, a verbal disagreement occurred shortly before noon. He said Margaret reiterated her intention to consult an attorney and asked him to begin looking for alternative housing after the holidays. He stated that the conversation remained calm until Margaret attempted to call her niece again. He said he intervened to slow her down because she appeared unsteady. At 12:17 p.m., Arjun called 911. The call lasted 3 minutes and 20 seconds. He reported that his wife had collapsed in the living room and was not responding. He stated that she had a known heart condition and had been experiencing dizziness for several days. He did not report any fall or external injury. Paramedics arrived at 12:26 p.m. Margaret was pronounced dead at the scene. No resuscitation was attempted due to the estimated time of death. The responding unit noted minor bruising on Margaret's upper arms and neck area, initially attributed to handling during collapse. Arjun stated that he had attempted to support her when she lost balance. The death was reported as natural, pending medical examiner review. Arjun contacted Margaret's nieces at 1:04 p.m. and informed them that she had suffered a sudden medical event. He declined their offer to travel immediately, stating that arrangements were already underway. At 3:11 p.m., Arjun accessed Margaret's laptop again. Digital logs show he reviewed immigration correspondence, insurance documents, and her calendar entries. Several files were opened but not modified. That evening, he emailed the immigration attorney to report Margaret's death and asked how it would affect his pending adjustment of status application. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy the following day. While cardiac pathology was present, the examiner noted inconsistencies. Soft tissue injuries inconsistent with a simple collapse, and timing estimates that did not align precisely with Arjun's account. Toxicology was ordered. The manner of death was deferred. On December 29th, a neighbor provided investigators with camera footage showing Arjun leaving the house at 1:36 a.m. on December 26th and returning 20 minutes later. Arjun stated he had taken out trash. The bags were not recovered. By that point, the case had shifted from routine death certification to formal investigation. What had initially appeared to be a predictable medical outcome now required reconstruction through timelines, physical evidence, and digital records. The sequence of events had passed the point where explanations based solely on illness could account for all findings. On January 3rd, detectives from the county sheriff's office formally reclassified Margaret Collins's death as suspicious. A search warrant was obtained for the residence, digital devices, and Arjun Malhotra's personal effects. The warrant cited inconsistencies between physical findings, timeline discrepancies, and digital activity following the death. The residence was processed over 2 days. No signs of forced entry were found. Furniture in the living room showed slight displacement inconsistent with routine use. Fibers recovered from the carpet near the couch matched those found on Margaret's clothing. No blood was visible to the naked eye. A forensic sweep later identified trace skin cells on the inside collar of Margaret's blouse that did not correspond to routine contact patterns. Margaret's medications were inventoried. Pill counts did not align with prescribed dosing schedules. One prescription bottle showed signs of recent handling inconsistent with Margaret's documented tremor severity. Toxicology results returned on January 6, indicating elevated levels of cardiac medication but within therapeutic range. No poison was detected. Digital analysis proceeded in parallel. Margaret's phone showed no activity after 10:03 a.m. On December 26, Arjun's phone showed movement throughout the day, including multiple location pings within the residence during the estimated time of death. Deleted browser history was partially recovered from his laptop. Searches conducted between December 14th and December 24th included immigration consequences of spousal death, conditional residency exceptions, and autopsy findings in elderly cardiac patients. Email records confirmed Arjun's message to the immigration attorney on the day of Margaret's death. The attorney responded that spousal death could qualify for a discretionary waiver, but would require additional review and supporting documentation. Arjun replied requesting guidance on timelines. Interviews with neighbors established that arguments were not audible, but several residents recalled seeing Arjun monitoring visitors and discouraging unplanned contact. Margaret's niece provided handwritten calendar pages recovered from the house. Entries detailed dates, times, and brief notes describing pressure regarding finances and residency status. No emotional language was used. During his first recorded interview, Arjun maintained that Margaret collapsed while standing and that he attempted to steady her. When confronted with autopsy findings indicating pressure-related bruising inconsistent with a fall, he revised his account, stating that she had grabbed his arm and that both had lost balance. He denied any intent to harm. Investigators requested a second autopsy review. The consulting forensic pathologist concluded that while Margaret had underlying cardiac disease, the pattern of injuries and lack of corresponding fall trauma supported neck and upper body compression occurring shortly before death. The cause was revised to asphyxia, complicated by cardiac vulnerability. The manner of death was ruled homicide. On January 11th, Arjun was arrested at the residence without incident. He declined to provide a further statement. Immigration authorities were notified, and his adjustment of status application was administratively frozen pending criminal proceedings. By the time charges were prepared, the narrative of a sudden medical collapse had been replaced by a documented sequence of pressure, concealment, and post-event maneuvering. The evidence did not point to premeditation over weeks or months. It showed a convergence of institutional risk, personal loss of control, and a moment in which force was applied to prevent withdrawal. The case moved from investigation to prosecution. The district attorney filed charges on January 18th. Arjun Malhotra was charged with second-degree murder under California Penal Code Section 187 with an enhancement for abuse of a vulnerable adult. The charging document alleged that the defendant applied unlawful force resulting in death without evidence of prolonged premeditation. Bail was denied based on flight risk and the pending immigration hold. Pre-trial proceedings focused on evidentiary scope. The court admitted digital records, recovered search history, device access logs, and neighbor camera footage. The defense moved to exclude portions of the second autopsy, arguing interpretive disagreement rather than new findings. The motion was denied. The court ruled that the revised cause and manner of death were supported by independent expert review. At trial, the prosecution presented a linear reconstruction, Witnesses included the cardiologist, the consulting forensic pathologist, the neighbor who provided camera footage, the immigration attorney, and Margaret Collins's niece. The state emphasized sequence and constraint, financial refusal, institutional exposure, the impending separation, and the narrow window in which withdrawal would have ended the defendant's residency pathway. The prosecution argued that the force applied was brief, situational, and directed to stop an act of disengagement, not to stage a death for financial gain. The defense conceded marital conflict and poor judgment, but denied intent to kill. Counsel argued that Margaret's cardiac disease created a fragile baseline and that the defendant's actions were consistent with an attempt to steady her during a medical episode. The defense challenged the interpretation of bruising and suggested that post-collapse handling explained the findings. No alternative suspect was proposed. Short excerpts from recorded interviews were played. In one, when asked why he accessed immigration correspondence immediately after the death, the defendant answered that he needed to understand his status. The prosecution argued that this response reflected priority rather than shock. The defense characterized it as panic. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On the third afternoon, they returned a verdict of guilty on the count of second-degree murder and found the vulnerable adult enhancement true. The court entered judgment accordingly. At sentencing, the court cited the absence of prolonged planning and the presence of sustained pressure leading to a lethal act. The court also cited concealment and post-event maneuvering as aggravating factors. Arjun Malhotra was sentenced to 15 years to life in state prison. He was remanded to the custody of the Department of Corrections with an immigration detainer lodged to take effect upon completion of sentence. Probate proceedings followed. Margaret Collins's will was executed as written. Her nieces retained ownership of the residence and accounts. No assets transferred to the defendant. Civil actions were not pursued. The case resulted in no changes to immigration policy and no revisions to elder protection procedures beyond internal advisories. The adjustment of status process remained unchanged. The institutional mechanisms functioned as designed after the fact. The outcome left irreversible losses. A life ended, a household dismantled, and a legal status resolved through incarceration rather than withdrawal. The record closed with a conclusion grounded in sequence and constraint, not anomaly.